let's be real. HR isn't powerless because we don't care or because we don't know what we're doing. HR is powerless because the system was designed to keep HR powerless. It was built to keep HR reactive, keep HR compliant, and to keep HR quiet. So here's the truth. If you are in an HR capacity and you are waiting for leadership to hand you your authority, it's not going to happen. And if it does, you'll be at retirement age by the time it gets to you. So look, HR is not powerless by accident, it's powerless by design. Welcome to the Let's Be Real podcast, Reframing Leadership and Reclaiming HR. I'm your host, Chase Niceley, and I'm the founder of Equip HR Solutions. So this podcast is a lot about HR, a lot about ways in which I view HR practices, and it is done through a framework that is an acronym called REAL: Resonance, Empowerment, Agency, and Leverage. So today's episode, we're going to unpack and talk through reasons why HR feels powerless and ways in which that can be fixed, and authority or agency, in sticking with that real framework, can be reclaimed by HR leaders. So by the end of this episode, you should know exactly why HR feels powerless and 3 ways to take that power back without waiting for permission that's unlikely to ever come your way. Let's talk first about the real reason of HR's powerlessness within organizations. So, a lot of people will get into debates, and you can see this on my social media pages in particular. People don't know what HR's role really is. Overwhelmingly, people will slap the label that HR exists to solely protect the company, or that HR is this branch of legal, or HR only cares about compliance. But in all reality, HR was first established in the early 1900s as a function for people. It was a function for recruiting. It was primarily administrative. And it also had a heavy emphasis on workplace safety, not laws, because those had not formed or they weren't into existence yet, but it was about people's workplace happiness or just their satisfaction with on the job demands. So administration was a heavy focus of it. And when you take a look at the way HR has evolved over the years, many organizations haven't evolved past that administrative function of HR. Hence, a lot of HR departments you'll find in accounting because it's easy just to slap the payroll label on it. Another hindrance or powerlessness of HR is that leadership intentionally will limit HR's authority in order to protect their own comfort. And you hear this a lot with the label of at will. Leaders know just enough about at will in context, and so they can put in a conversation where it makes sense from a conversational flow standpoint, but they don't understand the implications of what it actually means. And that's one of many examples. So if you can strip HR of the authority to make employment-based decisions, it lays or resides rather in the hands of leaders, and HR's job is just about giving the language, giving the semantics, and providing the resource in the context of thought partner instead of actual authoritative decision-making person. HR is also, when you see this by a status of norms, HR is rewarded for keeping the peace and minimizing conflict within workplaces. And in fact, they're encouraged, even so passively, not to rock the boat, not to make any sort of bold, big shakeup decisions within organizations. It's all about de-escalation. So in the context of being real, agency is stripped when HR's authority depends on keeping leaders comfortable. And I've seen this in my experience. I worked for a leader where he was aware. We had many closed door conversations about one particular person that was just toxic. And that's such an overused term, but this leader was in a position of high influence. And I will say, I'll be the first to acknowledge that the information that this leader had, if the person was out of the workplace, let's say they had resigned or had done something that was terminable and was no longer within the organization, it would have impacted the business's ability to operate. But that had all the leaders, they didn't want to make this person mad. And that principle of the workplace interruption, if this person were gone, that was the determining factor for everything. And we all had to dance around this person's ego. And they knew it. They knew it because they used that as a means of getting what they wanted. So I was always told, you can't change culture quickly. The leader would quote, I've been here for, I don't even remember now the actual amount of time from a quantitative standpoint, but they would say, I've been here for 3 years. Culture, you just have to change it over time. And there's enough truth in that statement. But when someone's behavior is impacting people, sometimes a bold decision is what's needed just to pluck the chaos, pluck the problem out so that we can maintain a baseline of peace. And, I can remember thinking, if your influence as a leader disappears every time leadership gets uncomfortable, you don't have influence. You've just created an illusion. And that was really frustrating for me in an HR capacity within this organization, because I could do nothing. And it was always about, you can't go talk to her, because that leader had to be the one to, we were trusting him to relay the message, but you get it. But in that situation, I had zero agency to just go and have a conversation, because you never knew what sort of bear you were poking that day. And again, that person knew it and they used it to their advantage to get what they wanted. Two, another way in which we talk about that the peacemaker mentality of being stripped of your power and feeling powerless. But another aspect of it is that HR professionals can find themselves in this peacekeeper trap. So yeah, I mean, and segueing into this, if keeping the peace is translated into keeping leaders comfortable, then you're not managing an HR function. And you're definitely not solving any problems. You are just making sure not to, again, rock the boat. And I've said this before, but employees within an organization, they lose trust in HR whenever the only thing that they can see and feel is HR protecting optics of leadership. People are smart. They see that, they sense that, and they read right through it. The truth matters to people, and people can handle the truth. So look, if your job is just to keep the peace, I'm sorry, you're not in HR. You were just PR for most likely poor leadership. The other thing that HR professionals can find themselves losing their power is whenever policy is seen as a cage. When they'll cite policy and say, well, we can't because here's what policy says. If you're always having to cite policy, pull out a handbook, or refer to a direct quote of your company procedures, that is the fastest way, arguably, for people to stop coming to you. People want to have a conversation, not to receive a citation. And policy is meant to be a guide. It's meant to be a tool. It is not meant to be a shield. And it is also not meant to be just the absolute way of doing things. So leaders, and especially HR leaders that are willing to hide behind any sort of policy, they're really just hiding from uncomfort. I don't know if that's a word. Lack of comfort. They're hiding also just from accountability. They're hiding from the accountability of having to look someone in the eye and explain why they made a decision. And this is an aspect of my HR practice that would drive a lot of leaders crazy, if we're being honest, because leaders want black and white. They want 1 + 1 = 2, and that's just not always the case. And I don't really remember the acronym. I used to say like 1+1 may look like it's 2, but in all reality, you might have an I in front of you. So it's 1I. It's not actually the number 2. And of course, leaders didn't care for that either because that was kind of a smart alecky remark, but it's true. People are not the same. Positions within an organization, they're not weighted the same. And the way that I believe that HR should be assessed is in impact. And if you think about it, the legal system, it's the same way. Things are assessed in the context of damages. So, what's the damages of this human behavior, and how can we work backwards from that damage to coach, influence, change, or correct the behavior that's taking place within the workplace? And from there, you get patterns. Your organization establishes patterns in the same way that humans do. And then you have a system, a methodology for managing your HR function and your personnel relationships. So, policy as a shield, policy as a means of mitigating or running from accountability is just a really big pet peeve of mine. And I just can't stand it. Leadership also, this is another way HR is powerless in organizations, is that leadership actually hands them this weakness. What do I mean when I say leadership hands HR their weakness? Is weak leaders, they love powerless HR. They love it because it means they're not going to receive any pushback. And if they receive no pushback, then they can make their decision. And they can also, it's a 2-for-1, they can use HR as the scapegoat. They can run to the person and say, HR, they're the ones that's making me have this conversation. And a lot of times HR may not even realize that it's taking place. They're seen as that dump and run when conversations get uncomfortable. The other thing is that you cannot be strategic in HR if you're treated as an errand runner or a reactive responder whenever leadership messes up or leadership needs something from you. If leadership sees HR as their cleanup crew, they'll never see them as their compass. In a similar story within that same workplace is that there was a leader there that never would say like, hey, here's the direction I want to go, and would never own it. They were never his words. He would go have these conversations with leaders within the organization, but then he would always blame it on me. And I can remember my boss coming to me and saying that a person within the organization that this leader directly reported to didn't like me. And I couldn't prove it, but I knew exactly why that person didn't like me. It's because this leader was going to that person and saying that I was relaying messages, or that I was coaching this leader to say these things. And in all reality, it wasn't true. He was the one wanting to have the conversations, but he was also using me as a shield so that he could absolve himself from the responsibility or the backlash that came his way, which is just natural if you're going to be a leader of people. So how do we fix it? Like, how do HR leaders within an organization reclaim power, and how do they fix it? Well, one, we have to stop accepting the peacekeeper role and call things as they are. It doesn't mean to create chaos. It doesn't mean that you are unwilling to play nice. It also doesn't mean that you lack empathy. But what it does mean is that when there is conflict within the organization, or whenever there is an issue that is just remaining unresolved, HR is the person that doesn't care about optics. They're willing to come in and make the bold decision and call it as it is. And that is where you get to the root of change, and it becomes intertwined. The root digs deep, and you have something that lasts, something that is fruitful in time. Painful for sure, because you're having to dig through a lot of dirt to get there, but you're still calling it for as it is, and you're not just worried about optics, that when the first bit of wind comes, it knocks it over. 2, HR has to document and defend their value. Your impact has to be visible. And there's a way to do this in a manner that doesn't come across as conceited or egotistical. It's just a way of going on record with something and referencing and using your own recommendations as direct quotes. Um, and it's really tacky when you do this and say, well, like I said. But if you can find a way to consistently preach, and I know preach, but truly communicate the same, have continuity in your messaging, you can make a difference and people start listening to you. And it's making your impact visible. 3, insert yourself into strategic conversations. Don't wait for the invitation. I wish that I did this better at my second W2 role. I waited for the invite to the point that I had been there long enough and they didn't really know what my role was. And looking back, I should have, again, had enough confidence to insert myself into those conversations. So, what does it mean to be real in HR if we're trying to reclaim this power, reclaim this authority? Well, we establish real by first establishing resonance with connecting with people, connecting with your leadership team, connecting with team members of those leadership teams, making yourself visible, having conversation, walk around, get to know them so that they see you as a person that cares, not as a person that is just filled with some sort of agenda. 2, under the real resonance, we have empowerment. How do you empower HR? Well, you lead with boldness, boldness that is rooted in one that resonates with people, but also boldness that is framed and is grounded in doing what's right. Agency, own your authority, own it. You are in the seat for a reason. You know what you're doing, you have the capability, and you care about the impact you're making. And leverage, use your influence to shape others positively. Don't do it for your own power trip, but do it to make an impact, not just for people, but also for the profession. Because look, you don't wait for permission to lead. You lead first, and then permission follows. Thank you so much for tuning in to the very first episode of Let's Be Real. We talked through ways in which HR finds themselves in a powerless position, but also how we can reclaim it with real strategies. But if you don't want to stop there, I encourage you to download the Reclaimed HR Guide that is in the bio of this podcast. And don't stop there. Subscribe for the podcast for weekly no BS HR and real leadership truths. Thanks for tuning in to Let's Be Real, where power is reframed, leadership is redefined, and culture is rebuilt. Make it a good one.